So in this post, I'm going to talk about 5 toxic traits caused by stress that lead us to self-sabotage. I think this is really important awareness because when I was stressed, I had all of these 5 toxic traits and they all led to self-sabotage, but I had no idea that this was the case, not until I started doing the healing work. And it's only when we start to bring awareness, consciousness to our patterns and behaviors and to see where it originated that we can start to shift out of these behaviors and to start to create positive change in our lives. And it is possible to heal fully from stress. This stress is something that started in childhood. And it's likely that your parents also have the same toxic traits. It's part of a generational pattern that gets passed on and gets passed on until we start to do the healing work. So there's no criticism or judgment. If this resonates and you recognize these behaviors, it's an opportunity to bring in more understanding, more compassion, more forgiveness. It's not your fault you're stressed. Again, it's a pattern that gets passed on generation to generation. But once we have the awareness, then we can be accountable for the patterns that we've been in, and we can start to create change. We can start to shift out of those self-sabotaging patterns and create a healthy relationship to ourselves and to those around us. We can start to free ourselves from these toxic traits. I'm going to have to do 2 posts because the list I came up with was really long. But drop me a comment below if you recognize any of these traits, or if you're aware of any others that you can add. Okay, so toxic trait number 1 is people pleasing. I was a lifelong people pleaser, something that started very early on in life as I learned to meet other people's needs and suppress my own needs. Of course, I wasn't aware of doing this, but I did it in order to get the attention I need, the validation I need, but also to feel safe. And growing up with volatile parents or in a volatile situation, it's a way in which you can create that sense of safety by trying to ensure that people around you are happy and have their needs met, which can be a mission impossible, and it takes a lot of energy. And what it ends up doing is that you ignore your own needs. And if this carries on into adulthood, which is usually what happens, you end up betraying yourself in different ways. You end up trying to create safety or a level of acceptance or appreciation, which is really covering up a lack of self-love and self-acceptance, really a lack of self-worth. Toxic trait number 2, control and manipulation. Now this is very much related to people pleasing, but it shows up in different ways. And again, stress creates a disconnect from who you are at your core, from feeling safe in the body in the present moment. And it causes us to need to control in order to feel safe. And in that way, it can also cause us to manipulate in order to get what we need, in order to feel safe, to have our needs met in some way. And this control can be very subtle, or it can go into the extremes, very rigid behavior, or behavioral traits such as OCD. You're operating from a sense of lack and limitation, of not trusting life, of not trusting yourself, of not trusting that you're going to get your needs met. And again, this is something that starts very early in childhood. The 3rd toxic trait is criticism and judgment. We learn to be incredibly self-critical, hard on yourself, judgmental. And again, this is a reflection, no doubt, of the environment you grew up in. Whereas that disconnect that stress creates, a disconnect from who you are at your core, of loving yourself for who you are. And there's a lot of judgment around what you feel, what you're allowed to feel, how you're allowed to be. And again, this is no doubt what your parents experienced too. So there tends to be a lot of judgment and criticism. This is something that you learn to internalize. So you judge yourself harshly. And it can undermine self-worth, your ability to be compassionate and kind, and to support yourself in the way that you deserve. So 4th toxic trait is hyperindependence. That tendency to isolate or to take on all the responsibility, difficulty in asking for help, of needing to do it all alone, or a belief that you are alone, or feeling very unsupported. And again, this starts early on in life, often when there's a lack of trust in those around you, or not having received that basic care and consideration. And so there's a tendency to take on everything yourself, to isolate, to push people away, to refuse help. And on the surface, it can look like you're very competent, perhaps even very successful at work or at home. But really, this is masking a need for control and a lack of trust, that it is safe to rely on others or to let other people in. A fifth toxic trait is a tendency to ignore red flags, to ignore your intuition, to ignore what you feel. Because again, stress, which you've experienced often at a very early age, often means that you've learned to suppress your feelings, to suppress your needs, and to suppress the way you express yourself. And in that suppression, we start to ignore what we're feeling. And in adulthood, that can lead us to ignore red flags and to choose certain situations, jobs, relationships, which then cause more stress and keep you in those reactive patterns. So these are the first 5 toxic traits that lead to self-sabotage. And as I said, it is possible to heal stress for good so that you can shift out of these patterns and start to affect positive change in your life. If you're interested in learning how I did it, and again, all of these 5 toxic traits are things that I've experienced and led me to sabotage my life, my experience in many different ways. So if you're interested in understanding how I healed stress for good, then I share this in a 6-week daily connection, the Alchemy of Stress. All the details are in the description box below. And again, leave me a comment if this resonated, if you recognize these toxic traits, and perhaps if there are more you can add. And I'll be making a second post to complete the list that I made. Okay, so as always, thank you for being here. I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next post.